Have you ever noticed that they only begin to value you when you vanish? Not when you give, not when you bend, not when you explain yourself into exhaustion, but when you disappear. The moment you stop being a convenience, the silence grows louder than your presence ever did, and suddenly, those who ignored your voice begin to feel your absence like a wound. They search for you in the places they left you abandoned, but you're not there anymore, because you've withdrawn, not in anger, not in weakness, but in power. You see, you were never truly seen, only used. Not maliciously, always, but unconsciously. You were the balm, the buffer, the emotional spare tire, always reachable, always soft, always explaining. And in that role, you lost yourself. What if I told you that your vanishing is the beginning of your sovereignty? That respect, real respect, doesn't bloom from overexposure, but from sacred distance? Carl Jung didn't write for the obedient. He wrote for those willing to become whole, even if it means being alone. He wrote for the ones who dare to walk away from the stage, just to see who follows them into the dark. And so I ask you, are you ready to vanish? Not to disappear from the world, but to finally reappear in your own life. They taught you how to be liked, not how to be whole. From the beginning, they handed you a mask. Polished, acceptable, presentable. Smile. Say yes. Be useful. Be agreeable. And every time you wore it, you received approval. But piece by piece, the real you faded beneath the surface. Carl Jung called it the persona, the mask we craft to survive the world. But what no one tells you is that if you wear it too long, you forget it's a mask. You begin to believe that you are what others need you to be. You speak to please. You nod when you want to scream. You stay when every bone in your body wants to leave. And one day, you wake up and realize you've abandoned yourself to stay acceptable. Tell me, how many of your yeses were betrayals? How many smiles were shields? How often have you shown up for everyone except yourself? The tragedy is not that others failed to see you. The tragedy is that you became invisible to yourself. You filled your schedule to avoid the silence. You replied to messages you resented. You explained yourself to people who never earned the right to hear your truth. And you thought this made you kind, noble, loyal. But this isn't loyalty. It's self-erasure. You weren't born to be endlessly available. You weren't made to be an emotional utility. You are not a faucet to be turned on when others thirst for attention. And yet, every time you answer when you don't want to, every time you keep peace at the expense of your own, you affirm a lie, that you must abandon yourself to be loved. But love built on self-abandonment is not love. It is a performance, a play where you forget you're not the script, you're the actor. So I ask you now, what would happen if you dropped the role? What would happen if you stopped smiling when you wanted silence? Stopped responding when your soul said, no more? The moment you remove the mask, you may not be applauded, but you will begin to breathe. And that breath, that sacred breath of self-return, is the first taste of power. There's something you've been giving away every single day. Not your time, not your money. Something far more sacred, your energy. Carl Jung didn't see the mind as a storage room. He saw it as an energy system. Every thought, every emotion, every reaction. It costs you something. Your psychic energy is not infinite, and yet you've been living as if it were. Every time you reply to a message you didn't want to answer, energy. Every time you defend yourself to someone committed to misunderstanding you, energy. Every argument, every explanation, every need to be seen, you're bleeding energy into a world that does not return it. And by nightfall, you collapse. Not just tired, empty, like something's been drained from you that you can't quite name. And that's because it has. Your life force has been siphoned by 1,000 invisible cuts. Tiny daily self-betrayals disguised as politeness, compassion, duty. Let me ask you, are you choosing where your energy goes? Or are you letting the world decide for you? Most people live in emotional overdraft. They give before they rest, react before they think, prove before they reflect. And they confuse this hyper-responsiveness with strength. But it is not strength, it is exhaustion in disguise. Jung warned, that which you resist not only persists, but grows. The more you react, the more entangled you become. The more you defend yourself, the more you remain in battle. And the more you explain, the less they understand. You don't need to be louder. You need to be less accessible. You think you're being helpful, but what you're doing is being harvested. Harvested for attention, for validation, for emotional supply. And if you don't learn to close the gates, you'll wake up one day with nothing left to give, even to yourself. This is not a warning. This is a mirror. Look closely. Are you giving your energy, or is it being taken? You think you're in control because you say yes with a smile. You think your availability is kindness. But in truth, it is currency, and someone else is spending it. There are people who have learned how to pull your strings without lifting a finger. They don't yell. They don't beg. They simply make you feel responsible for their peace. And you respond like clockwork. You think you're helping, but you're not. You're being used, not always out of malice, but out of habit. They've grown used to you being the one who bends first, who answers the call, who explains themselves, who keeps the emotional order of the room intact, even when it's breaking you. You became the mirror they needed, reflecting back the image they wanted to see. And every time you respond to keep the connection alive, you sacrifice a piece of your soul to preserve their illusion. Carl Jung called it projection, the unconscious act of seeing in others what we refuse to face in ourselves. But projection needs a canvas, and if you are too available, you become that canvas. You become the screen where others play out their unresolved wounds. Think about it. That friend who only calls when they're in crisis, that partner who praises you when you're useful and withdraws when you say no, that family member who guilt trips you into being their emotional parent. These are not relationships. These are contracts, silent agreements where your silence is their comfort. And why do you agree? Because you're afraid. Afraid of letting them down, afraid of being abandoned, afraid of being called cold, selfish, difficult. But listen to this. The most effective form of manipulation isn't control through dominance, it's control through guilt. Because if they can make you feel bad for choosing yourself, you'll come back willingly, every time. So I ask you, what if you stopped reacting? What if you said no and didn't explain? What if you let their disappointment echo in the silence and didn't rush to fix it? Because the truth is, the manipulator doesn't need to chain you. They just need you to keep dancing to the same emotional rhythm. And the moment you stop, the game ends. When you disappear, something else appears, not in the world, but in you. At first it's quiet, then it's not. It speaks in memories, in old emotions you thought you buried, in a strange ache that surfaces when there's nothing left to perform. Because now, there's no one to impress, no role to play, just you. And for many, that's unbearable. Carl Jung called it the shadow, everything you suppressed to be loved, the rage you swallowed, the needs you ignored, the truth you denied to stay chosen. And the moment you withdraw, truly withdraw, you meet it face to face. You feel guilt, you feel fear, you feel the trembling urge to go back, to explain, to clarify. But that's not your soul speaking, that's your conditioning screaming. You see, the shadow is not evil, it's exiled. It's the part of you that remembers when being honest got you rejected, when being powerful got you punished, when being unavailable made people call you selfish. And so you learned to be good, to be pleasing, to be small. But now, something has shifted. You've gone silent. And your silence, far from being empty, is now the birthplace of confrontation. Because here's the truth most people run from. When you vanish from the external world, you appear in the internal one. And there, in that unlit room of your own psyche, you begin the real work, the inner work, not affirmations, not spiritual bypassing, shadow work. You start to see how often you've betrayed yourself to earn crumbs. You begin to grieve the decades spent molding yourself for comfort you never received. You start to feel anger, not at others, but at the version of you that thought self-erasure was love. And through it all, you remain silent. Not because you're weak, but because now you are listening. Jung said, "We do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." And that's what this withdrawal is. Not escape, not isolation, but illumination from within. You are not disappearing. You are returning. And in that return, the false self begins to crack. Let it. Because only what's false fears the silence. There is a kind of silence that is more commanding than speech. Not passive, not avoidant, but deliberate, sacred. You see, the world has trained you to react, to respond, to fill every pause with noise. But there is another way to exist, a way that does not require explanation, only presence. Strategic silence, not the silence of fear. The silence of power. The silence that says, "I no longer owe you an emotional performance." That says, "I no longer volunteer for battles I never started." That says, "I am not here to soothe your discomfort with my compliance." This silence is not absence. It is presence, amplified. It shifts the dynamic in every room. It unsettles those who once knew you as predictable. Because now, they can't read you, can't provoke you, can't control you. They ask, "What's wrong?" Because you are no longer available on command. They say, "You've changed," because your silence has disrupted their script. And what they really mean is, you've stopped playing the role they assigned you. Carl Jung understood this deeply. He knew that individuation, becoming your true self, requires space, requires withdrawal, requires a kind of silence that doesn't come from defeat, but from maturity. "Solitude is for me a fount of healing," Jung wrote, "which makes my life worth living." That's what this silence is. It is your return to the fount, a private river no one else can touch. It is you reclaiming the most precious thing you have, your psychic energy. Because when you do not speak, you conserve power. When you do not explain, you retain mystery. And when you do not react, you become sovereign over your own emotional kingdom. And yes, people will hate it. They will call it arrogance. They will call it coldness. But what they're really saying is, I can no longer use your reactions to regulate myself. And that's the shift. That's the fracture in the system. That's when the game ends. Because now, you are no longer a puppet. You are the space where the puppet show once played. You are the silence that ends the performance. At some point, the only sane thing left to do is vanish. Not to punish, not to hide, but to reset the soul. Disappearance is not the absence of being. It is the recentering of energy. The quiet rebellion against a world that demanded you be constantly accessible, endlessly giving, perpetually exposed. And when you vanish, truly vanish, everything shifts. At first, there is confusion. They message, you don't respond. They poke, you don't flinch. They demand a reaction, and you offer none. And suddenly, the entire structure begins to collapse. Because here's what no one teaches you. Your presence was never neutral. It was fuel. It powered conversations, relationships, emotional dynamics that had nothing to do with your truth. You were the invisible engine keeping the whole charade alive. But when you vanish, when you stop feeding the system, it reveals itself for what it truly is. Fragile, dependent, hollow. And in that moment, you begin to feel something too. At first, it's a strange guilt. Like you've broken some unspoken law. Like you've left the stage before the curtain call. But what you've really done is taken your life back. You start to notice that the silence which once screamed at you begins to sing. You realize you don't need as much stimulation. You don't need as much validation. You don't need as many people because you have space, because you have clarity, because you have yourself again. You were never meant to be so externally entangled. You were never designed to be stretched so thin across so many needs that you forgot your own. And now, you're not running away. You're re-entering your sacred center. Jung understood that individuation, the process of becoming whole, requires a rupture, a break from the collective noise, a stepping back from the roles you've been playing for a lifetime. Because sometimes, you have to disappear just to remember that you were never supposed to be everywhere in the first place. This is the vanishing phase. It is not the end. It is the beginning of sovereignty. Your silence will not be welcomed. Your absence will not be applauded. Because the moment you step back, truly step back, you become dangerous. Not because you said anything, but because you stopped saying everything. You see, people weren't attached to your presence. They were addicted to your predictability, your reactions, your comfort, your agreement. And now that it's gone, they're exposed. Not to you, but to themselves. That's why they get angry. That's why they say, "You've changed." That's why they poke harder trying to get any response, even a negative one, because your unavailability has stripped them of the illusion of control. Let me tell you something. You will be accused of being distant, arrogant, selfish, cold. But none of that is true. What's true is this: you've stopped playing the role. You've stepped off the stage they built for you. And they don't know what to do with someone who no longer fits in the story. Carl Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But make no mistake, the path to that privilege is not lined with approval. It is littered with misunderstanding. You will be painted as the villain in stories you were never meant to be part of. You will be cast as the problem because you disrupted the emotional economy. You stopped giving for free what others depended on to survive. And that is unforgivable to the emotionally entitled. But listen to me. Their discomfort is not your burden. Their confusion is not your cue to return. Their rage is not your responsibility. You do not owe an explanation for your evolution. You do not owe a justification for your peace. And the more they fight your absence, the more they reveal how much they were feeding off your imbalance. So let them rage. Let them twist the story. Let them scream into the space you left behind. Because when your silence threatens them, you know you were never respected, only used. And now you are free. And then, after the noise fades, after the backlash burns itself out, something miraculous begins to emerge. Not outside, inside. A space. Quiet. Still. Unshaken. A presence you haven't felt in years, perhaps ever. It's you. Not the persona. Not the role. Not the helper, the fixer, the performer. Just you. The one who no longer flinches at silence, the one who doesn't explain their boundaries, the one who protects their peace like it's sacred. Because it is. This is the rebirth. Carl Jung called it individuation, the unfolding of your true nature from beneath the rubble of expectations, and it cannot begin until you rupture the identity you built to survive. You are no longer a reaction. You are no longer a mirror for others to see themselves. You have become your own source. And now something strange happens. People begin to treat you differently, not because you demanded it, but because they can feel that something has shifted. Your silence now speaks louder than your presence once did. Your boundaries radiate without needing to be declared. Your energy becomes selective, refined, potent, sovereign. You don't chase. You don't explain. You don't shrink to fit where you no longer belong. Because the one who disappears and survives the solitude returns not as who they were, but as who they truly are. You are not cold. You are clear. You are not distant. You are dignified. You are not arrogant. You are awake. And finally, they begin to respect you. Not because you shouted for it, but because you no longer need it. This is sovereignty, not control over others, but mastery of yourself. So now, what do you do with all this silence? You guard it, you protect it, you honor it as the sacred threshold it is. Because you didn't just disappear from others, you reappeared in yourself. You reclaimed your name from every conversation that didn't deserve it. You reclaimed your peace from every chaos that mistook you for shelter. You reclaimed your time, your voice, your soul. This is not isolation. This is inner sovereignty. You're not unavailable because you're bitter. You're unavailable because you're no longer for sale. Carl Jung said, "The individual who withdraws from the collective, not in bitterness but in strength, begins the true path to wholeness." And now, you walk that path. No applause, no spotlight, only depth, only clarity, only you. So if you feel misunderstood, good. If you feel alone, good. It means the false is falling away. It means your center is returning. It means you are becoming whole. And from this day forward, you do not chase, you do not prove, you do not explain. You withdraw, you vanish, you rise, quietly, completely, unapologetically, because they only begin to respect you when you finally respect yourself enough to vanish.